feeling, of course, we would take the local airline that the volunteers called Inshallah Airline. It would run when God willed it. That won't do. I have to be accompanied by a male relative. Raouf cannot take times off and the boys are having exams. Where we bonded most was through dance. The first time we ate at her home, she hired a drummer. Walter was so consumed with his duties that he had to leave. I can never resist a good beat. It was a small room, but when Fatima began to dance, I joined her, and the party became even livelier. It was not the belly dance. Arms were lifted overhead, and there was a lot of fast footwork. Her family joined us for our second Thanksgiving in country. The motto on the cover of the Peace Corps cookbook was, from the Old Testament, "How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land?" At Fatima's, we always sat on the floor, on the toe shocks on the floor to eat. Our house came with a dining room table that could seat the 10 of us. Our family were members of a Quaker meeting. Quakers have silent grace and they're not hymn singers. I was beginning to wonder how to explain this when Fatima piped up, "I want to hear the song." I presumed she meant the Thanksgiving hymn. So I hoped that my Jewish husband, who had spent his high school years at Choate and had to go to chapel every day, had learned it. And I thought Christopher had in school, and he was our one who could carry a tune. We got through it with a lot of grace and love. After our meal, the oldest boy played Afghan songs on a harmonium. Her family sang, and she and I danced. As we whirled around, I noticed 2 shadows on the silk screen that divided the room into 2 sections. Anwar Abdulhamid was standing there, watching and listening. I felt that evening totally at home and at peace with my world and myself. We didn't know then that in 3 months' time we would be packing up for our return trip. Our departure date had been moved from June 1st to March, mid-March. Fatima said she was going to cry for 3 days. We canceled our vacation plans, stayed home, and enjoyed the snow. Afghans have a saying, they would rather have snow than gold. The melt from snow in the high mountains is ingeniously channeled downhill, downhill, downhill for irrigation of fields, and also ends up in those ditches beside the road, which are in many places the sole source of water for a village or town. I know because we stayed overnight with a Peace Corps couple that had to go out in the evening and bring in the buckets of water to strain and then boil. The Germans, who had built so many useful things in Kabul, a marble factory and a woolen factory, constructed a ski hut outside town with a rope tow operated by an automobile motor. I was a reluctant skier. I sat in the hut with a bag of sandwiches and was just beginning to unwrap one. The hut was small, with 3 small tables. There were 2 empty seats at mine. The door opened behind me, and 2 young Afghans came in. They were dressed in elegant overcoats. They looked like they might have just returned from London. I invited them to sit down, and almost at that very moment, a young Afghan girl child slid onto my lap and began to eat one of the tuna fish sandwiches. I did the mom thing of sliding my arm around her to better balance her on my knees. And at that moment, a Soviet agent, I had learned to spot them by then, walked over. He did the appropriate thing of not looking at an Afghan woman's face and attempted to engage the young men in conversation. In my first weeks in country when I was so green, I had been targeted myself. In the Cold War, both sides were desperately trying to get someone to defect. The young men's faces were impassive, and I often wondered what happened to them. The agent's last words were, "We want to get you guys a radio." What with being surrounded by those high mountains, one needed a good shortwave radio. It really tickles me that during my last days in Afghanistan, I passed as an Afghan mom. We left just before Eid in the spring, but not before the short spring rain when the dry plains became covered with thousands of wild lilies. Then it was up and away back to New Jersey. It took us many months to feel integrated into our homeland. Catherine and Chris found they had acquired a worldview they could not share with their peers. Me, I freaked out in the supermarket. I couldn't decide what brand or flavor of ice cream to buy from the, brand or flavor, yeah. From the large array. Only the youngest, now 8, was undeterred. He asked his father to make him a cassette of slides and gave a presentation to all 3 third grades in his school. Afghanistan never had a better promoter. In 1979, the American ambassador in Kabul was assassinated. The Peace Corps withdrew and the Russians invaded. During the 80s, several million Afghans left their homeland. Some just took the refugee camps in Pakistan and Iran. They returned at the end of the fighting. The more affluent Afghans dispersed to such far-off places as Australia, UK, Canada, and the United States, and many have not returned. Fatima and her husband and the 2 girls are American citizens now. The girls married American men, one of Afghan origin. The 2 sons stayed in UK and married British women. No one wanted to hear stories about Afghanistan until after 9/11. Then some of us wrote books. Several of the male former Peace Corps volunteers went looking for the old Afghanistan and reported it could still be found far out in the countryside. Several women we know returned to do useful projects with children, widows, and teachers. There was no way to locate Anwar since he had only one name and no address. I thought he appeared to be about 10 years younger than myself, but it was so hard to tell Afghan's age. One morning when I was working near the garden gate and the bell rang, I opened it, and it was like I had stepped into the Old Testament. It was someone standing there on a robe, like, what as they said, the many-colored robe of Jacob's colored robe. In the north, people from the north wore these long robes of brilliant colors, and he had on a turban. And his face was so wise and kindly. And Anwar had heard the bell too and came running down. Afterward, I said, who was that? And he said, Old Babe. Well, it turns out that every old gentleman they called an Old Babe. So I asked, well, how old is Old Babe? And he thought for a while, and then he said, 40 maybe? And I thought, oh my God, I'm 41. But life, with the fierce winds of winter and the scorching winds of summer and the dust storms, people aged very fast, and also all the hard work they did. There was no, so I soon became resolved to the fact that he's probably not alive. Chris created the website and a YouTube for my book, and sometimes I get interesting emails. I become pretty cautious. Shortly after New Year's, I received an email that began, "Salam alaikum to a very kind lady." I wondered what this young man wanted from me. He was writing from Green Mountain College in Vermont. He was an Afghan exchange student from Bamiyan, with a dream of building a library in his hometown. I replied, I told him I would make some inquiries, that I had no resources of my own, but I would tell him what I always told my children. In dreams begin responsibility. Honor your dream, take care of your dream, protect your dream, and you will attract the people who can help you. And I said, I send you a mother's prayers and blessings. Several weeks later, I got a reply thanking me for my motherhood prayers and including an attachment with a full report and a budget for the library. Through the many talks he has given in the past 2 years, he has raised most of the money for the building, about $22,000. That's in range with what Greg Mortensen does. A local nonprofit in Bamiyan, started by the Hazaras, is donating the land and contributing in other ways. He is looking now mostly for funds for books and laptops, shelves, desks, and so forth, generator. The library is for his large high school of 4,000 students. What is even more amazing is his story. He was 9 years old in 2001 when he had to run and hide in the mountains from the Taliban, where he says, "We lived on grass." Walter, too, Christopher's father, was 10 years old when he had to run from his homeland. His family were among the lucky few who received visas for the United States, signed by Harry Bingham. Walter was the first one I mailed about my wish that as a family we make a donation for those books. On the internet, I discovered an article by a British journalist who visited Bamiyan in the summer of 2008 and wrote a piece about talking with one young man she met there who was eager to read Shakespeare and Chaucer. As an English major, I am really excited about this project. It has been worth the wait for the perfect resolution for my wish and to make a contribution to Anwar's people. One of the most important lessons one needed to learn in Afghanistan was waiting. The language doesn't even have a future tense. Everything is like, tomorrow we do this, inshallah. Next week we'll go there, inshallah. Everything happens according to God's will, inshallah.